While it is true that the Constitution and the Bill of Rights were written by certain people in the past, in the 1700s, it's also true that the circumstances under which they existed don't exist today. Back in the days of the Revolution, they were actually dealing with a number of issues that we don't deal with today. First of all, the Founding Fathers were not only dealing with the westward expansion that was also always going on, they were dealing with the British, they were dealing with bears, they were dealing with the Native American tribes, among other dangers. And so, as far as the Second Amendment is concerned, there was a better argument to be made as to why guns were needed. But of course, the most evolved gun of the time, some say it was a musket, but it was really some rifles. But they had to be reloaded in a similar fashion to muskets. The Pennsylvania long rifle was the one they used during the Revolutionary War. So those were the Brown Bess musket and the Pennsylvania long rifle were the two commonly used long guns of the Revolutionary War. Now, the way the Second Amendment is written, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. What the right loves to do in this case, and what they think the Founding Fathers intended, and it's completely wrong, is they think the Founding Fathers intended for all people in the country to have guns in case they need to overthrow a tyrannical government. This is not the case. If that were the case, the language would have said so in the actual amendment, but it doesn't. James Madison, George Mason, Patrick Henry, Thomas Jefferson, all were talking back and forth about this. In fact, Kyle Kulinski several years ago did a segment on this, and I can actually put a link in the bottom. Tom Hartman also brought this up in his podcast recently about how the Second Amendment really had two purposes. Number one was for the issue of standing armies. And with the issue of standing armies, they said, well, they can't be together when they're home. They have to disband. But they can form militias in their respective states and keep weapons. But of course, there is an inherent contradiction here, and that is that if you get enough of these state militias together that are armed, well then you've got basically the potential for a standing army that could overthrow the government if they wanted. And that's kind of what the right-wing militia groups, the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, hell, even the KKK and some of these other groups, that's what they've been wanting this whole time. And I wish I knew when that started, because it didn't start during the formation of the country. If I'm not mistaken, it either started like shortly after or during or after the Civil War, or during the Civil Rights era. Yeah, I could be wrong. Anybody who knows any more than that, please let me know in the comments. But that's my theory, at least for now. If I know better, I can let you all know. But the second part was for preserving slavery, because the compromise here was to get some of the more hesitant states to join the Union, most notably Virginia, which is where I'm from. They said, okay, if you join the Union, we'll let you have militias, and you can be armed so they can prevent slaves from escaping to freedom. That's the militias they're talking about. The militias they're mentioning are slave patrols. So the Second Amendment really is, in many respects, a relic from a bygone age and really just doesn't hold any meaning today according to how the Founding Fathers wrote it. Okay? It's one of the reasons why I say, we should have a constitutional convention mandatorily once every generation, once every 20 years, to revisit these amendments and see if they need to be tweaked or some of them eliminated, some added, whatever, to meet the times. Now, granted, you have a little bit of instability long term. You have kind of like a wave of circumstances that will exist. But this is actually a good thing in this case because it means that the Constitution could be amended to meet the needs of the people who live in that time. Now, what the Founding Fathers intended, knowing this truth here, is irrelevant. The Founding Fathers had some intentions when they first formed the country, when they first wrote the Bill of Rights, when they had the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. It doesn't mean anything today. Almost nothing that happens today existed when they were alive and what they had to go through. Weapon systems have advanced. The people we have formed relationships with and made enemies of have changed. In fact, if you really line everything up, you'll find that because of our imperialist ways, because of our war being a business model, the Founding Fathers, I honestly don't know what they thought at the time as far as that was concerned. But one thing I do know was they knew that the French and the the Spanish, I'm sorry, at the very least, they were itching to stick it to Great Britain because you had the British Empire back then. France and Spain were looking to make their mark on the world, of course. The Germans, of course, were at the behest of the English, and so Hessian, however you say that word, mercenaries, were at the employ of Great Britain to help deal with the colonials. But anyway, a lot of what's in that amendment, the Second Amendment, is a relic from a bygone era and doesn't hold any value today. Now, what you can do is rewrite the Second Amendment if you had the Constitutional Convention and make it so that the Constitution is still relevant. Okay? And that's just the Second Amendment. Free speech is another one. You know, a lot of people give, Great Britain or Canada a lot of flack for not having free speech in their constitutions. But the way I've seen it, a lot of that has to do with culture. You know, Canada is really funny here because it has one law that says saying you're sorry is not an admission of guilt. They actually have a law that says that, which is really funny to me. But it's because they were saying it so much that they had to clarify that doesn't mean you're admitting anything. It's just a cultural thing. As far as the UK goes, I think they're a lot stricter on free speech. Canada seems to be a bit more serendipitous and allowing things to happen in a more nebulous fashion. You know what I mean? It's kind of like the progression of their culture will dictate the appropriateness of the speech. That's the vibe I get from them. But anyway, you look at some of these rights and the amendments that were passed down. Some of them are really good. Some of them aren't. In fact, if you look at the Constitution itself that comes after the Bill of Rights, a lot of the way the government is structured through these amendments, or even not even just the amendments, just the outline of the whole regular Constitution before you get into the articles, a lot of that is outdated. And so that language can be subject to change as well, or should be. In fact, I would argue, and I've made this argument before, that if the government's job is to preserve and protect the public welfare and the people, everybody in this country, is subject to the rights and guarantees of the Constitution, legal or illegal, I honestly think that the case for health care being a right of all people in this country is already guaranteed by that language in the Constitution. I don't know why nobody's made that argument in court, but anyway, money talks in today's world. It did back then too, but even more so today. But I think there is a case to be made for that particular argument. Now, back in those days, and even all the way up to now, America has had, I don't know if you want to say infamous or a notorious reputation of having a culture that takes life for granted. Because most of what went on was everybody was just out to strike it rich. Like everybody came here and they were like, yeah, you know, we're going to strike gold, we're going to hit oil, we're going to dig up diamonds or silver, we're going to make a lot of money. And a lot of people just think that's the whole purpose for America. And in some ways it is. The laws have been written in modern times to make it be that way. But here's the thing. Not everybody in America, in fact, I would argue less than half the country, I mean, I could be making that up, but most people, when you talk to them, they just want to have peace of mind. They just want to live their lives on their own terms. And what we've allowed to be created is a country, a culture, that basically forces everybody here to adhere to an ideology that most people, by and large, simply don't agree with. You know, not everybody wants to have a business. Not everybody wants to make unlimited amounts of money. Not everybody wants to do so by exploiting people. Not everybody wants to be exploited. And by having a system that depends on the exploitation of people and basically says you will be exploited by an employer if you live here because we're capitalist and that's the end of it, that's not freedom. That's not liberty. That may sound like freedom and liberty to a capitalist who's totally fine with exploiting people, but for most people, legal or otherwise, this is corporate tyranny or economic tyranny if you want to be a little broader about it. So again, a lot of this, I don't even know if that was even in consideration when they formed the Constitution. So that goes to what I said before about conditions today not being the same as back then. Thomas Jefferson, when he became president, he was going back and forth with Alexander Hamilton about how the issue of private banks controlling people's money was a terrible idea because what they would do, and he was 100% right about this. He said, and I'm butchering the saying here, but he said, you know, if people allow private banks to control the issue of their money, the corporations that will grow up around those banks will deprive the people of their property until they wake up homeless on the very continent their fathers conquered. That is exactly what happened. We are living through that every day. In fact, if you go look at Rebecca Parsons, she's actually a congressional candidate up in the Seattle area. She was on Fox News with Jesse Waters recently. If I can find that video, I'll put a link into it below, because that is amazing how she runs circles around him. But she highlights in her platform housing for all, and she says, people should squat. Homeless people should go squat in these empty homes that are just sitting there and nobody's using them. Not a bad strategy when you think about it. Now, of course, what you're going to hear from these media pundits and from these banks and corporations is, yeah, but they didn't buy the home, so they have no right to be there. The banks bought it. The banks should say, get out of there. And yeah, what's going to happen when the homeless people do this? And I would ask Rebecca Parsons how she plans to deal with this. What's going to happen is the banks are going to send in, the Pinkertons, for lack of a better term, the mercenaries, basically, to go in there and remove these people by force and throw them in prison, possibly, or just kick them onto the street. And once they're on the street, they're subject to being thrown in prison again. Capitalism, by its very nature, is dependent on having a huge pool of desperate and desolate people to draw from so that capitalists can maximize their profits. Now, again, I don't think anybody really knows what the Founding Fathers thought when they wrote the Constitution. Did they have this in mind? Did they not have this in mind? Did they leave it open so that people could make laws and pass constitutional amendments accordingly if that should happen? Maybe. They went into this not knowing all the answers. In fact, they were very upfront about that. This, I believe, may have been one of those things where would have been like, we never saw this coming. We would have never known what to do in a million years. So, I'm going to say this again. I honestly do not care what a bunch of 300-year-old dead slave owners would have wanted to do and what they intended when they wrote this thing, because it's irrelevant to today. The two major political parties who throw this thing back and forth like a football, that's all they use it as, a political tool for their own advantage, and they interpret it deliberately in ways that fit their own ideology, because the language of the Constitution is so vague. It leaves too much room for interpretation. That's why what the Founding Fathers intended was ultimately irrelevant. We need a convention once every generation so that the people who are next in power, and we do need term limits on our congressional and Senate. I would actually just get rid of the fucking Senate, or even blend the Senate in with the House of Representatives, expand it into a parliamentary system. Maybe you could kind of do it that way. But it would be a lot more direct to the people, a lot more representative of the people that way. And if you allow all parties to be included by default, by the design of the system, and make it illegal to keep them out by any means, you will have a much better system overall, much more democratic, small d democratic, and the people would have much more say over what happens in their lives, and then you just don't have a bunch of money-grubbing billionaires and corporate executives running for office, using their success in the business world as leverage to try to fool the people into thinking they'd be great political leaders, and just rigging the system in their own favor and saying to the people, hey, thanks for voting us in, now go pull yourself up by your bootstraps, because we're going to pervert and subvert the meaning of government to be basically just an extension of a corporate board on Wall Street. Because that's pretty much all our government is today. So, I don't think the Founding Fathers really knew this would happen. I don't know if they really thought. Thomas Jefferson, to my knowledge, was the one who thought about this the most. Maybe Benjamin Franklin might have, because he was a brilliant guy for his time too. But I really don't know. I just know Thomas Jefferson was probably the most on the ball as far as documentation that we have on issues like this. But then you get into other parts of the Constitution. I mean, when you have the way they were laying out how to align electoral votes, this made no sense to me at all. No sense at all. Because populations change in every state. And when you try to allow a fixed number of electorates, and by the way, the states do have ways they can change the number of electorates based on their population if they want to. You rarely, if ever, see that, though. And so they've stuck with the same electorates. But it's just so funny how a state like Wyoming and a state like Vermont have very similar electoral votes, but they have a little difference in population. But then you have the most populated state, California with 55, Texas has 38, Florida has 25, Pennsylvania has 20. You get the point. the populations are never the same. There are deaths, there are births, there's immigration going on everywhere. It's not feasible, it's not a sound strategy, and it doesn't make any sense to have fixed electoral numbers when the people are changing all the time. That just doesn't make any sense. It has to be strictly popular vote. When it comes to the chief executive, it cannot be by this fixed electoral number. The number of states is ultimately irrelevant when the populations are different. So, yeah, the populations of California, Texas, New York, Florida might be determining the president, but that's where the people are. Okay, that is where the people are. Sorry to the other states if that hurts your fee-fees, but you know what? You don't have that many people. And ultimately, that is what a president or a chancellor or a prime minister or whatever is elected to do. Represent all of the people, not all of these blocks that we call states. All the people. The people are the ones who make it work. The states are just arbitrarily drawn lines on the landscape that we invented. That's it. So the Constitution, again, it has to be updated periodically, I think, and it's irrelevant today. It really is. A lot of things that they did back then, just they don't hold up to today's world. We need to have a regular convention. We need to start, coming up with ways to try to make the Constitution truly a living document, because there's still that debate going on. I can't believe there is. Because if it truly was scripture, we wouldn't have had the ability to put new amendments in there. We would never have had, the abolition of slavery, with the exception of prisons. That needs to be fixed, by the way. And I'll go off on a little tangent here and just say that if you really want to have reparations for the African American community for slavery, it's not in giving them money. That's like a bribe. That's like insulting their intelligence. What you really need to do is just eliminate that loophole in the 13th Amendment. This goes to the convention I'm talking about. So you could basically say, okay, you could rephrase that amendment to basically eliminate the phrase except as a punishment for crime whereby the parties shall have been duly convicted, right? You eliminate that language. You have eliminated slavery entirely. That's the best form of reparations you could have for these people, so that it never, ever happens again. That also eliminates corporations' ability to exploit labor through the prison system. You know what I mean? So now they would have to pay them. Now they would have to give them bargaining power because, yeah, they may be in prison, but they're doing work. They still got to purchase stuff. You make it so that they make cents on the dollar a day and they can't purchase anything. And what they get from the prisons, because of the nature of it, a lot of it is privatized. And they're just fed basically bad food, rotten food, spoiled food maybe, or just left to be hungry because, hey, they're criminals and we should just leave them to die. Well, yeah, very Christian of you. Yeah, somebody may have committed a terrible crime, but they're still human beings. They're still Americans. You still got to feed them, because by not doing so, you are an accessory to murder. I don't care how many people they killed. You do this to somebody, you are also responsible for doing an evil deed just like they did. You're killing them too. Only it's a slow, drawn-out torture. So it's a way of carrying out revenge. It's not justice. It's just people agreeing to torture somebody to satiate their own sense of outrage. That's really it. So get rid of that. And what else we can do is basically get rid of the Senate. You kind of reform the language in this Constitution to make it into a more parliamentary approach, where all parties are, eligible to run without hindrance from any other party or any other outlet. We do have a free press, which is a good thing. But there has to be an exception when it comes to political campaigning, okay? You know how the Supreme Court basically said, defamation, slander, and threats of violence are not protected speech under the Constitution? This kind of stuff has become normal in political campaigns. If that were outlawed under our Constitution, which it should be according to what the judges handed down, well then we would have much cleaner elections. They would be like, hey, well, they wouldn't be able to just defame and slander these people all the time during their campaigns. They would have to be like, hey, here I am, here are my ideas. Now the other person would have to do the same thing and just let people make up their minds. The media should not be allowed to try to twist things. They would just have to let it happen naturally, These headers at the bottom of the screen, if you go and look at Rebecca Parsons' interview, There was a header at the bottom where they were talking about the fact, where she said that she wanted people to go into the houses and squat in there and get the attention of these people, these banks, these corporations, to start listening to them and make a deal with them so the housing could be affordable, right? The bottom part of that interview had been labeled socialist break into empty homes, rather. Now notice the framing of that: socialist break into empty homes. They're trying to paint her as a lunatic already. I don't know if she noticed that. I have never seen a progressive candidate go on there and say, yeah, I know you've got that misleading and disingenuous header at the bottom of the screen right now, so I'm going to call you out on it. I would love to see that a lot more. It would have been great if she had done that towards the end at least, because then when he was about to close the interview and she said it at the end there, he would have been like, uh-oh, I got caught with my pants down. But she ran circles around. Anyway, you do that. And another thing, too, I'm losing my train of thought here. I'm sorry, guys, if I'm going on a little bit long here and like losing my continuity. I have a problem with that, I know. But I don't think the media should be allowed to do things like that. I don't think the media should be allowed to skew the narrative that a candidate is trying to present as to what their ideas are, why they are the way they are, and how they would work. Okay? This is something the media has done to the American people to get them to vote against their best interests for decades. They always make people like Rebecca Parsons, like Bernie Sanders, like Nina Turner seem like they're out of their gourd, when in fact, given the situation, their policy positions are well within reason. Well within reason. I would argue that Rebecca Parsons' policies are probably the best I've seen so far. Better than Bernie's even. But of course she lives in a state where things are very expensive. But here's the thing about that. Price controls, along with a $30 an hour minimum wage. I agree with that, actually. But you also have to take into account that by just raising the minimum wage all the time, in order to stay in business, a lot of smaller businesses are going to have to raise their prices. So what do? Where do you draw the line in certain places? Well, you have to take into account that human needs must be classified as human rights. And this must be guaranteed in our Constitution. This is what the Economic Bill of Rights was in part meant to do. If we had that and we had language in there, and I have, some amendments. In fact, let me see if I can pull this up. Hang on a second. Let me do this. All right, guys, I'm going to read you a little something here. All right, let me go ahead and finish it over here because I'm hiding myself there. Okay. All right. Let me see here. Now, the housing part might actually be the People Act. The Economic Bill of Rights I might be able to read, but right now I'm going to read you this one that I have. The first one was the Priorities Amendment. I actually did a video on this before, but here it is, the Priorities Amendment. I wrote this out a while back. It says, no legislature, local, state, or federal, shall pass any law that detracts from the 10 basic commons of society. And it lists them: health care, infrastructure, education, military, police, firefighting, agriculture, housing for all, public utilities, and Social Security. Those are the basic commons that I have laid out. Now, that could be subject to change with the consensual tax reform on the ballot that I have, where basically people vote on what their tax money's used for. But anyway, moving on. It says, nor shall these bodies pass any law prior to the 10 basic commons being duly addressed and fully funded. So let me repeat that because I cut myself off there. No legislature, local, state, or federal shall pass any law that detracts from the 10 basic commons of society: healthcare, infrastructure, education, military, police, firefighting, housing, public utilities, and Social Security. Nor shall these bodies pass any law prior to the 10 basic commons being duly addressed and fully funded. Section 1. Federal funding of all basic commons shall be duly addressed in succession as determined by way of a public referendum using ranked choice voting as part of the federal voting cycle. Local and state funding of all basic commons shall likewise be determined the same as part of each state's respective voting cycle. That basically covers what I mentioned a couple seconds ago. Section 2. Failure of any and all respective legislative bodies to duly address and fund the basic commons within 30 days of the final results being declared shall result in automatic authorization of the distribution of necessary funds as decreed by the respective public referendum. So in other words, if they didn't vote on it because, I don't know, corruption, or they didn't get around to it, they just didn't want to do it, whatever, well then it's automatically going to be sent to the mint to print the money and to distribute it to where it needs to go by default. Section 3. Absolutely no private, individual, or institution shall have agency over the 10 basic commons with the exception of, and basically what this means is you can't leave these things up to the private sector with the following exceptions, and I specifically state in here what those exceptions are. So here we go. Agriculture with regard to the creativity and individual needs of the farmers and their communities, as long as those decisions and or actions do not pose a threat to public or environmental health. Okay? Healthcare with respect to the relationships and decisions among doctors and their patients. No government entity, local, state, or federal, shall have agency over doctors or their patients as to what treatments are allowed through their collaboration. I hope you all go back and read that one because that's important. A lot of people who are against universal health care bring this up. Well, big government's going to dictate who gets health care, who doesn't. They're going to tell you where you go, where you can't go. Not true. Let me read this one more time. Health care with respect to the relationships and decisions among doctors and their patients. No government entity, local, state, or federal, shall have agency over doctors or their patients as to what treatments are allowed through their collaboration. Government stays out of that when it comes to healthcare. They just act as the filter for the money. So this guarantees that universal health care wouldn't be corrupted by individual decisions in government. They can't use those decisions. It would automatically be struck down in court. And finally, is that the last one? Yeah. Education per the inalienable right of all people within the states, the United States jurisdiction, Let me read that again. Education per the inalienable right of all people within the United States jurisdiction to seek out and acquire information without restraint or retaliation from any individual or institution, public or private, save for the sole exception of information that qualifies as personal data, which may be obtained only through the express consent of the individual or institution in question. Freedom of information, guys, except for your own personal info. That's off limits unless you say it's not. So again, y'all go back and look at and hear that out and let me know what you think. And this one kind of capitalizes on it a bit. This is the Academic Freedom Act. This is a little bit old. It might be, but anyway. Academic freedom is hereby recognized as an inalienable human right, and no individual or institution, public or private, shall abrogate or abridge this right for any reason except for direct threats of violence, slander, and defamation as observed by the First Amendment, and in cases where the information being sought is personal data, which may only be acquired with the express consent of the individual or institution to whom said information pertains. I know I'm saying quite a mouthful here. This is a long video, guys, so feel free to stop and go back if you want to. The American Peace Act. I like this one too. Hold on. No individual or institution, public or private, shall engage in warfare as a means of conducting commerce. Or let me read that one more time. I love this. The American Peace Act. No individual or institution, public or private, shall engage in warfare as a means of conducting commerce. The right of all individuals, institutions, and sovereign nations to exist freely and peacefully is hereby fully recognized and accepted. I want to read this one more time. I love this. No individual or institution, public or private, shall engage in warfare as a means of conducting commerce. The right of all individuals and institutions and sovereign nations to exist freely and peacefully is hereby fully recognized and accepted. Section 1. Any individual or institution, public or private, or any combination thereof, accused of war crimes or crimes against humanity, is entitled to the full rights and benefits of the due process of law. Punishment, in the event of a guilty verdict, shall be handed down as prescribed by law. Now we can deal with war criminals. Section 2. In the event of a formal declaration of war as agreed upon by Congress, or could be changed to Parliament, but it says Congress here, all revenue generated through the means of production and their subsequent sales as they pertain to said war effort shall be immediately available for the assurance of the 10 basic commons without exception. I want to read that one more time. I love this one. This basically guarantees that war profiteers won't be able to hoard their profits so they can lobby Congress to just keep war going. In the event of a formal declaration of war as agreed upon by Congress, all revenue generated through the means of production and their subsequent sales as they pertain to said war effort shall immediately become available for the assurance of the 10 basic commons without exception. War profiteering is illegal now if this were to be enacted into law. Let's see, how many do I have here? I have 2 more on this list, so bear with me. I know this is a really long video, guys, but hang on. The Will of the People Act. This is another amendment I have written out. In the event a House or Senate representative goes rogue on a given proposal, the census reflecting that representative's constituency shall have immediate veto power and serve as the official vote. You notice how we have censuses that are taken on an issue like, how do you feel about abortion? How do you feel about gun control? How do you feel about universal health care? How do you feel, I don't know, about fully funding tuition-free college? Whatever the case is, okay? Well then, the census taken from that constituency, if that representative refuses to vote according to the census of the people, the census will serve as the official vote. So this is a fail-safe. If the people are for Medicare for all, for example, universal health care, and the representative is taking money from the private health insurance lobby, you know what this means? That person's vote won't count, and the census in favor of universal health care will serve as the official vote in their place because they've been corrupted. This is what I mean when I say the Founding Fathers' intentions were irrelevant. You do this kind of stuff, you can change this according to how the times need it. That's the point. Now let me go ahead and, oh man, I'm looking at the screen here and I see that oh man, anyway, the background's really looking crappy right now. I'm really sorry about that, guys. But let me just continue this. I know it looks terrible right now. Section 1. If a vote is not held in either the House or Senate on a given proposal within 30 days of an agreement being reached, the census from all representative jurisdictions shall be tallied and will serve as the official vote on the proposal in question. If the legislative body in question refuses to tally the census results, the responsibility falls to the state's respective House of Delegates. If a state legislature does not tally their results, that state's Supreme Court will serve this function. If any of the state's results are either ignored or tampered with, the Supreme Court of the United States shall tally the ignored census and or prioritize accurate census results as the situation warrants. So as you can see, this is kind of trying to pull out the stops with regards to not carrying out the will of the people. Section 2. If a census is not taken in time for the vote, a grace period of 30 days will be granted to conduct a thorough and accurate census of the jurisdiction in question. Any further delays will result in said jurisdiction abstaining from the official vote. Abstentions can be changed if the abstaining jurisdiction's representative calls for a right of extension or a census is completed within 14 days after the official vote is held and tallied. Any further delays will result in a final abstention. Remember, guys, these are things that I came up with, okay? So, the Right to Economic Security Act. And this is the last one, guys, I swear. The shadow coming in from my window here is really, is kind of making the image behind me drown out from the green backdrop, and it looks like crap. So I'm really sorry about the video quality here. The Right to Economic Security Act. As per the inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, no individual or institution, public or private, shall abrogate or abridge the economic security of any person or institution without express consent by the subject in question to do so. Economic security in relation to this amendment is recognized as the state of being that is necessary to meet all of one's basic needs. So it clearly defines what economic security means for this. Violation of this amendment shall be met with immediate and duly appropriated compensation to the adversely affected party as prescribed by law. Okay, guys, I have to stop this video now because I can see the image behind me is really getting bad. Oh, well, some of it still is, but anyway. That's a lot to take in, guys, but I hope this kind of proves the point of what I mean when I say the Founding Fathers' intentions were irrelevant. I just gave you some, what I think are awesome ideas for constitutional amendments or revisions. So let me know what you think about it in the comments, and I will be back later.